Russian President Vladimir Putin's war machine is now carving a path of destruction more than a week after his unprovoked assault on Ukraine began. Russian forces today captured their first major city. The mayor of Kherson saying Russian troops are now in control there, with 5 other cities surrounded by the Russians, including Chernihiv, which is being pounded. The capital, Kiev, remains in the eye of the storm. That huge Russian convoy still 15 miles out. Today we were among a small group of journalists meeting Ukrainian President Zelensky. He arrived without a large entourage, carrying his own chair. He said he's willing to negotiate with Russia, but not over Ukraine's sovereignty, and that it all depends on one man.
Vladimir Putin has so far not been willing to meet with him. Do you have a message for him now that Ukrainian cities are under attack? This city is under attack. A convoy is on its way here. Is there a way to prevent this war from escalating even further now?
It's not about I want to talk with Putin. I think I have to talk with Putin. The world has to talk with Putin because there are no other ways to stop this war. That's why I have to.
As he spoke, French President Macron had what his office described as a disturbing call with Putin today. Putin insisting Russia was not targeting civilians and ominously saying he would pursue his military operation until the end. But Russia is hitting civilians. In Kharkiv, this activist was live streaming, thanking supporters for donations when... And in Mariupol, a father cried, holding the body of his teenage son. As a U.S. military official predicts, the most violent phase of this war has yet to even begin.
President Zelensky today appeared calm and relaxed. Asked if he's afraid he'll be killed, he said yes, that only a disturbed person would not fear for his life. Asked if he plans to stay in this city without hesitation, he also said yes.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.